Welcome to Let's Think About It. I'm Maria Keffler.
I'm Erin Brewer.
And I'm May Lyle.
And Erin, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about how there are boys who adopt a trans identity who are not autogynophiles. And we did a video the other day about autogynophilia and sort of those issues, but really want to point out that not all boys who adopt a trans identity are autogynophiles. And I want to just preface this with something about language. There are a lot of people now on the gender critical side who are almost as militant about the kind of language that we use as the trans activists are. And I'm going to be using the term ROGD, which is for rapid onset gender dysphoria. I'm probably going to say gender dysphoria a couple of times. And I've been told that I should never use that term by some because it's buying into the gender ideology. I also think it's important for us to be able to communicate. And so I don't want to become as the language police in the same way as the trans activists are. So hopefully people who are watching this will understand when we're talking about gender dysphoria, it is a diagnosis from the DSM-5. And though I do question whether or not it's an accurate diagnosis, and I do push back on the idea that these are gendered behaviors, or that there even is such a thing as gender. I feel like it's really important to use the terms that are being used in the, out there in society so people know what we're talking about. So when I say ROGD, people are like, oh, right, I've heard of that. Whereas if we just talk about this being a dissociative disorder or an identity disorder, people may not really understand what we're saying. So I hope that's all right.
I'm fine with that. And as far as gender dysphoria goes, I'm thinking about one sister that I talked to who, it was a girl. She kind of got sucked into all of this via social media and school, as so many people do. But she said that when she finally accepted that she is a woman, there's nothing she can do about that. Within a week, her gender dysphoria completely disappeared, just boom, went away. Yeah. And I think that really supports what we know, that your mind has a lot of power over how you feel and even over what your body's doing. And so I don't want to go too far afield already this morning, but this is one of the reasons that we don't encourage social transition, because we know that what you do, what you think, what you persist in your mind leads you in a certain direction. And so that gender dysphoria, I don't think that's a bad term to use.
Well, and I also want to present this. There's a kind of a group of people who are very compassionate to girls who have adopted a trans identity, especially the ROGD girls. And a lot of times this is not extended to boys because there is a misbelief that all boys who adopt a trans identity are perverts or paraphilias. They're just AGPs, just trying to invade our spaces. And that's one of the motivations for us talking about this today, because these boys are victims of this ideology as much as the girls are. And a lot of times it's the same things that cause them to adopt a trans identity. We have the kids who are ROGD. We have kids who have, boys who have experienced severe trauma. When I talked to Hashi Horvath, he talked about how his stepfather beat him severely, and he grew up not wanting to be a man because his role model of being a man was this very abusive person. So this is not someone who's an autogynophile. Think about Billy Burley, who was sexually assaulted by his swim coach. That's not a man who is an AGP. This is a man who has adopted a trans identity because of self-hatred and trying to dissociate from that little kid that was abused. We also have munchie moms, I call them. These are moms who are really uncomfortable with an effeminate boy, who will encourage that boy to adopt a trans identity simply because the child's effeminate, the boy's effeminate, and they're very concerned about that.
Well, and there's also just the amount of attention and acclaim and approval. I don't know about you guys, but I see this on social media. Some moms are so excited to have a gender non-conforming child, and they can't wait to transition them. because maybe I'm going to get my own reality TV show, or everybody's telling him how brave and stunning and amazing they are. So there's a lot of social cred that comes with it.
Yeah, there's even a video I saw where the woman was talking about her effeminate boy, and she said, he's not going to be gay. He's not going to be gay. And she converted him into being a girl because she was worried that because he was an effeminate little boy, again, this is a boy who's way too young to even have a sexual identity, sexual orientation, but she was concerned because of these regressive stereotypes that if a boy acts a certain way, it means he's not a real man. And so she actively converted him. This is a child who's not an AGP. This is a child who's been abused. And then you mentioned, moms wanting to get their cred. The other thing that I'm seeing really often among boys, and these are sensitive boys, they're often really tender boys who are being given the message by this new critical theory that if you are a white male, you are oppressive, you are the bad guy, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're a white male. Except if you become a woman, then suddenly you're not the oppressor anymore. And so this is a message that boys are getting from the time they're pretty young. I can't believe how many messages my son has gotten about it not being okay that he's a white male.
My son too. My son, he's now in college, but he talked about in high school being told, you're just a basic white boy. You don't have anything to say. Despite the fact that my kids went to a Title I elementary school where they were very often the only white children in the school. So they do know what it's like to experience being a minority, but they're still told because they're white, they don't know what it's like to be a minority and they have no voice.
Well, my son was told, his first year in college, in one of his classes, that he shouldn't speak in class because he was a white male, and he needed to let basically everybody who wasn't a white male got to speak in the class. So these are, if you have a sensitive boy who's getting these messages, and they're picking up on this, it's not surprising that they might be like, well, maybe I'm not a male. I'm not one of those bad guys. I don't hate women. I don't oppress people. I must be a woman, because the message of what it means to be a man now is so negative.
And these boys keep hearing this message over and over and over until it's like they start believing this lie. So it's very unfortunate. And something else that I wanted to bring up is the fact that I've spoken to so many parents of these boys who, years later, they find out that their sons have been sexually abused, and they never came to their parents to say anything. And if they'd have come at that point in time, so much could have been done to help these boys. But they said, I know one parent that said that the boy said, well, I was afraid that you would get mad at me if I told you.
Well, that's a message that predators give the children too, is, oh, your parents will be really upset if they find out about this, so don't tell them.
And I think for boys, a sexual assault is even more confusing because their bodies will respond to the sexual touch. And so I've heard from males that when they're in a position where they're being assaulted or abused, they will get an erection. And so oftentimes those boys have just tremendous anger at their penis because it betrayed them, because in this very traumatic situation, it responded in a way that our bodies do respond. And so it's not surprising that these are boys who want to get rid of it. And that's something that I see is really one of the bigger differences between an AGP male and a male who's adopted a trans identity due to one of these other issues, is that the AGP male wants big breasts, and really puts on this affect of being the exaggerated stereotypical woman. Whereas boys that are struggling with these other issues, they tend to want to get their testicles cut off. They tend to want to get their penises cut off. They tend to, have this self-hatred. They want to medicalize because they're trying to become somebody else. They're dissociating and running away from themselves. So these are boys that deserve compassion. And I really have, I think it's really important to make sure that we distinguish. These are very different categories. We have one that's very predatory and one that actually is a victim of this ideology.
And I think that's one of the problems with trans activism, is that they're saying there's transgender people. That's it, transgender people. And there are so many different reasons. I mean, Erin, you've been kind of working on a taxonomy of all the different types of people who get pulled into this and the reasons why. And I think that is so important to look at those reasons why. And when you were talking about little boys who'd been sexually assaulted and get an erection, I can just imagine their abuser saying, look, see, you really like it. If you didn't like it, this wouldn't be, you wouldn't have this.
You wouldn't, exactly. I mean, you hit it so head on, Maria.
And it's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is really heartbreaking. And yes, these are boys who are being told that it's okay for them to appropriate women's spaces. These are boys who are being told that women's consent doesn't matter. And so they're being given this message from the time they're in preschool, really, from even probably before that, because of all the messages they're being shown. And so, yes, we need to assert ourselves, but it's also important not to vilify these boys who really have been, I mean, in no other time in history have children been taught that if they're uncomfortable with who they are, they should simply become somebody else, and that those feelings are too big and too difficult to deal with, and who they are is so flawed that they should just, completely reject themselves and become a new person. I saw this one young man, I think he was in his early 20s, and he had gotten his testicles cut off, and he was keeping them in a jar next to his bedside. And I just thought, this is a young man who's deeply troubled. I hear a lot of people who, it's almost like what they're saying is, these people are mentally ill. They need to stop acting like people are mentally ill and start accepting that they're mentally ill. That's kind of the message that they get. Well, people who are mentally ill don't have the skills and ability to negotiate that mental illness, especially when we have society reinforcing that mental illness and telling them that they're not mentally ill. So
even society's even creating this mental illness by pushing this on kids so young and making them question at the earliest ages, at 4 and 5 years old, question what their bodies are. I was thinking about, I was probably 7th or 8th grade when I learned what a lesbian was. And I remember asking myself, could I be a lesbian? And I thought about girls, and then I thought about boys, and I was like, no, I really, really, really like boys. But that was a moment where I could have been like, oh, maybe I am. And if I had people around me telling me, oh, that's a better way to be, or, oh, I've seen things in you that make me think that you really are. I mean, homosexuality is quite a different thing from transgender, but the transgender identities are being created, they're being taught, they're being enforced, and we're not letting children even grasp reality before this is forced on them.
We have a lot of messages about toxic masculinity. And I think that there's a lot of boys who think, well, if I'm not this, aggressive, abusive, in your face kind of alpha male, maybe I'm a woman. And that's to me, this is why this ideology is so awful, is that it's giving completely the wrong messages. We should be telling boys that if they're sensitive and kind and loving and caring, woohoo, you're a wonderful male. That's awesome. And if we have girls that are, smart and assertive and, brilliant, athletic,
or you like science or engineering.
Yeah.
That's
and
great.
Instead we're this whole ideology is just completely reinforcing these really regressive stereotypes. And unfortunately, what we see is girls who are put on testosterone because of the effects of testosterone often become that toxic male, that aggressive, that sexually pursuing, that, kind of, toxic male. And boys who are put on estrogen become these, sort of that very, feminine, very
Shrinking
meek,
violence.
yeah. And so it's, again, reinforcing these incredibly dangerous sex-based stereotypes.